Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jan Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Shiva Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Shiva Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Gurudeva Gurudev Jaya Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya.
Narayanam Namaskritya.
Naram Chaiva Narottamam.
Naram Chaiva Narottamam.
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam.
Devim Saraswati Vyasam.
Tato Jaya Mudiraya.
Tato Jaya Mudiraya.
Nastapreshu Abhadresu.
Nashkareshu Bhadresu.
Nityam Bhagavatam Sevaya.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Bhagavati.
Bhagavati Uttama Sloke.
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke.
Bhaktir Bhagavati Naistiki.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishiki.
By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed to practically nil, and thus loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental hymns, becomes established as an irrevocable or irrevocable fact. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and thus loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental hymns, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. I may have repeated that a couple of times. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we're reading from the first canto still, with the last chapter, 19th chapter, and it's the appearance of Srila Sukadeva Goswami. Today's text is text number 8. Okay, it's on the board. Please repeat. Tatropa Jagmor.
Tatropa Jagmor.
Bhuvanam.
Bhuvanam.
Punana.
Punana.
Tatropa Jagmor. Bhuvanam. Punana.
Tatropa Jagmor.
Bhuvanam. Punana.
Mahanubhava.
Mahanubhava.
Maniyaha.
Munyaha.
Sasishyaha.
Sashishyaha.
Mahanubhava. Maniya Sasishyaha.
Mahanubhava Munaya Sasishyaha.
Prayena.
Prayena.
Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Swayam.
Swayam.
Tirthani.
Tirthani.
Punanti.
Punati.
Santaha.
Santaha.
Swayami Tirthani Punanti Santaha.
Satyaswami Tirthani Punati Santaha.
Tatra Pajagmora Bhuvanam Punana.
Tatropa Jagmur Bhuvanam Punana.
Mahanubhava Maniya Sasishyaha.
Mahanubhava Munaya Sasishyaha.
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Padeshai.
Swayami Tirthani Punanti Shantaha.
Swayami Tirthani Punati Santaha.
Tatra Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana.
Tatropa Jagmur Bhuvanam Punana.
Mahanubhava Maniya Sasishyaha.
Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha.
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Bigama Padeshai
Prayena Tita Bigama Padeshai
Swayam Hitirtani Punanti Shantaha
Swayam Vitirthani Punanti Shantaha
Tropajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Tatropajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Mahanubhava Munayasa Sishyaha
Mahanubhava Munayasa Shishyaha
Prayena Tirtha Bigama Padeshai
Prayena Padeshai
Swayami Tirthani Punanti Shantaha
Swayam Tithani Punanti Shantaha
Tatro Pachagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Tatro Pajagmur Punanam Punana
Mahanubhava Munayasa Sashya
Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha
Prayena Tirtha Vigyama Padeshai
Prayena Tirtha Bhigama Padeshai
Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Shantaha
Swayami Tirthani Punanti Shantaha.
Question, is Munaya or Manaya?
It's, I think Munaya, but let me find the word here first. Yeah, it's Munaya, Mu, Nayah, with a dot under it, but we don't pronounce the ha. So just Munaya.
So is it related to Muni?
Yeah, I believe so. Let me look real quick here. It's translated as think is.
Okay, so it should be Munaya because it's coming from Muni. Okay. Tatro Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Tatro Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha
Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha
Prayena Tirtha Bhigame Padeshai
Prayena Tirtha Bhigama Padeshai
Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Shantaha
Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Shantaha
Tatro Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Tatro Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana
Mahanubhava Munaya Sasisya
Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha
Prayena Tirtha Bhagikama Padesai
Prayena Tirtha Bhigama Padeshai
Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Santa
Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Santaha Tatro Pajagmur Bhuvanam Punana Mahanubhava Munaya Sashishyaha Prayena Tirtha Bhigama Padeshai Swayam Hi Tirthani Punanti Shantaha.
The P and the D have to lose some weight because they're squeezing that poor A.
Lose some weight.
You know, because they squeeze the A, it's just a tiny little A being squeezed.
It's hard, you know, the
It's
board
hard,
is so
right, yeah.
small, the
I
things are so
appreciate
long.
it. I know what
You know, I've done it before, people who do it will understand, it's so hard. Only Mother
There's
Tongue
like poor
can do
little
it.
A
like
there. It's getting
perfect.
crushed by this big D and big P.
I know, she doesn't squeeze, that won't be any space in the back. Only Colin knows how to write that so good.
No, I think Angie and Kat was doing good.
Is that
Okay.
Katya was writing that? No, it's Angie.
Angie and Kat was good. Today I think you're right, Angie.
Okay.
Word for word, Tatra,
Tatra
there, Upajagmuhu,
Upajagmuhu
Arad,
Right.
Bhuvanam, the
Bhuvanam,
universe.
the universe.
Punana, those who can sanctify.
Those who can sanctify.
Let's see, Maha Anubhava,
Mahanubhava,
great minds.
Great minds.
Munayaha,
Munayaha.
thinkers.
thinkers.
Sasishaha,
Sashishaha,
along with their disciples.
along with their disciples.
Prayena,
Prayena,
almost. Tirtha,
Tirtha,
place of pilgrimage.
place of pilgrimage.
Abhigama,
Abhigama,
journey.
journey.
Apadeshai,
Apadesha,
on the plea of, on the plea
of
Swayam,
Swayam,
personally. He, certainly. Tirthani,
Tirthani,
all the places of pilgrimage.
All the places of pilgrimage.
Punanti,
Punanti,
sanctified.
sanctified.
Santaha,
Santaha,
sages.
sages.
The translation, please repeat. At that time,
At that time,
all the great minds and thinkers,
all the great minds and thinkers,
accompanied by their disciples,
accompanied by their disciples,
and sages,
who
who could verily sanctify
can very sanctify
a place of pilgrimage,
a place of pilgrimage,
just by their presence,
just by their presence,
arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey.
arrived there to make a plea
to making a pilgrimage
journey.
Arrived there on the plea
Arrived there on the plea
of making a pilgrim's journey.
of making a pilgrim's journey.
At that time, all the great minds and thinkers, accompanied by their disciples and sages, who could verily sanctify a place of pilgrimage, just by their presence, arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey. Srila Prabhupada's divine purport.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
When Maharaj Parikshit sat down on the bank of the Ganges, the news spread in all directions of the universe, and the great-minded sages who could follow the importance of the occasion all arrived there on the plea of pilgrimage. Actually, they came to meet Maharaj Parikshit, and not to take a bath, of pilgrimage, because all of them were competent enough to sanctify the places of pilgrimage. Common men go to pilgrimage sites to get themselves purified of all sins. Thus, the places of pilgrimage become overburdened by the sins of others. But when 6 sages visit overburdened places of pilgrimage, they sanctify the places by their presence. Therefore, the sages who came to meet Maharaj Parikshit were not very much interested in getting themselves purified like common men. But on the plea of taking a bath in that place, they came to meet Maharaj Parikshit, because they could foresee that Srimad Bhagavatam would be spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. All of them wanted to take advantage of the great occasion. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the 8th sloka, 1st canto, 19th chapter, the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
I offer my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, who has opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge, although they were shut by the darkness of ignorance. When will Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who has established within this material world the mission To fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
So here we're being blessed to hear about practically like getting to experience or see, depending on our state of consciousness, and which depends on our purification, the arrival of so many great personalities in the universe take advantage of the speaking of Srimad Bhagavatam on the planet Earth at a very dramatic moment when the emperor is fasting till his death on the bank of the sacred Ganges, and the son of Vyasadeva, the literary incarnation of God, appears on the scene, completely immersed in the highest stages of Krishna consciousness. And he recites the beautiful story of the personality of Godhead in 18,000 slokas over approximately a week's time. So it's a big affair, universally speaking, for people who are aware of such things and can comprehend the importance. This is another time at the dawn of Kali Yuga. Demigods still visited the earth. These prominent sages, such as the sister and ever sons of Brahma, such as Bhrigu, they still occasioned the earth when there was some event like this, or like prior to this was, 30, maybe 30-something years before, was the Rajasuya Yoga of Maharaj Yudhisthira. And again, you had prominent people in the universe came to attend. What was not often that a Rajasuya sacrifice was performed on the planet Earth. So at that time, big people within universal affairs attend, like devas and sons of Brahma and their disciples, and ever prominent sages and powerful munis and thinkers in the universe. So this is the beginning of that recitation. We're hearing it from Sutta Goswami, who was there and had the opportunity to hear, and he's reciting it to the sages at Naimisharanya. And that's how it begun in the first chapter of this sacred Bhagavatam. Now in Kali Yuga, 5,000 years have passed, and during that time, ever great personalities have incarnated to help humanity. One of the first being the Buddha, an incarnation who utilized different means to stop the horrific slaughter of animals through the use of Vedic rites. To do this, he established on his own, the power of his own persona, his eightfold noble path of Buddhism, which rejected the Vedic literature and the existence of a Supreme Lord and the existence of the individual soul. And he simply focused on this life and bringing an end to karma by following his teaching of the Eightfold Noble Path, eventually concluding in meditation to dismantle the false ego and mind and body and to again become a part of nirvana, or the great void. So sometimes you see these little comical jokes that are posted, and there'll be some Buddhist monk opening up his present very gleefully and saying, "Oh boy, a big box of nothing." Their philosophy focuses on ultimately, in the ultimate issue, on becoming nothing. But of course the common people, they're worshipping their ancestors and the devas, and they're praying for their welfare in this world, like most commies do, fruitive workers, people who are just trying to enjoy things in a good way without having to suffer from ill karma or from various types of evils in this world. So they all pray to God in that way. So they pray to the Buddha and have temples in the Far East, and some in India, which gave the Tibetan Buddhists the opportunity to establish themselves after the Chinese invaded Tibet and forced their Buddhist culture into a submission, adhering to the state ideology and giving prominence to the state rather than, in their culture, to the teaching of Buddha as they interpreted it. So they crossed the border into India, and India gave them shelter, which is a big thing, because China goes on to become an extremely powerful country. India, around that time, maybe it was after it went to war, where China was chipping away at the border between them, and was also aiding Pakistan in various ways concerning the whole Kashmir issue. So, they went to war, and that was one of Nehru's great disappointments, because he was a sort of a neutral figure in the world who was attempting to preach peace and nonviolence like Mahatma Gandhi. And then the Chinese, he felt, stabbed him in the back by all of a sudden going to war. And India put up a sort of dismal defense, but for whatever reason, whether it was because winter had come or whatever, China wasn't as rich of a country as it is now, and the Chinese just all of a sudden withdrew. And things kind of went back as they were before. But it really, made India, become cautious. And after Nehru, his daughter was elected, and she fared much better in warfare. Sort of forced to aid Bangladesh because of the humanitarian crisis. The Pakistani army creating all sorts of what was being thought of as genocide at the time to some degree, and so the Indian army went on in and very quickly and strategically surrounded them and forced 40,000 man army into surrender. And so anyhow, that's politics in our modern era. But Buddha was one of the first of great people to appear in the Kali Yuga. After that, Adi Sankara, I forget the time, maybe 800 AD, was it something like that?
Yeah, 9th century.
9th century, he appeared and had his purpose. He preached a sort of covered Buddhism. He established the Veda again in India, established it as being the supreme book of information, and established the all-pervasive impersonal Brahman is supreme, based on a sort of distortion of Vyasadev's Vedanta Sutra. But of course, this is Lord Shiva himself teaching, so it said if anybody reads the commentaries that he gave, his Bhashya on Vedanta Sutra, and one will fall down. because we're dealing with the logic of Lord Shiva here. Basically, he does like the Buddha. He just doesn't accept Vyasadev's conclusion of the absolute truth is that source from whom everything comes. He takes away the personality and establishes the absolute truth is simply springing forth from the all-pervading Brahman, and that everything in this realm is just illusion, and the only reality is the all-pervading, imperishable, and inexhaustible Brahman energy. So Adi Shankara appeared and re-established the Veda, and then after him came Madhva and Ramanujacharya, whose disappearance day it is today. The latter, Ramanujacharya, it is his disappearance day. Ramanujacharya being there in the late 1000s, I think leaving around 1137 or something like that. They each, Madhva and Ramanuja, each gave a different, I don't want to use the word twist, but they gave a theistic perspective to Vedanta, to Vyasadev's philosophy, and preached contrary to Adi Shankaracharya's monism. Ramanuja's was termed Vasistha Advaita, if I'm not mistaken, and that means a qualified monism. And I believe Madhva preached the dualism of the soul and the super soul, that there is a personal aspect of the absolute truth. So both of them, Ramanuja and Madhva, preached about the personal aspect of the absolute truth. But then Lord Chaitanya comes along in the 15th century, and he establishes his Achintya Beta Beta Tattva, Achintya inconceivable, Beta the same, Abeta not the same, Tattva truth. Everything is simultaneously inconceivable, inconceivably one and yet different. Achintya Beta Beta Tattva. That the absolute truth, Supreme Personality of Godhead, possesses inconceivable energy. And it is none different from himself, but at the same time, it is different. Because there's nothing equal to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead is equal to every bit of his energy. Om Purnam Adapurnamidam Purnat Purnamudachite. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Yet, he remains the complete balance. So there may be so much infinite energy expand from him, and it may be so extremely variegated. But he's the balance of each aspect of it. He's the complete balance of it all. He's equal to all of it. And one proof of this is when Brahma stole the cowherd boys, and then Krishna simply expanded himself. It's not only the cowherd boys, but also the calves were stolen along with the boys. Krishna expanded himself as those calves. Mm-hmm. And when he disclosed all this to Brahma, they all of a sudden changed into four-armed Vishnu forms. Mm-hmm. So in that way, Krishna can very easily appear as any of the different aspects of his energy. But none of those energies can appear as Krishna. Just like it would, an example would be to derive part of Prabhupada's analogy. Prabhupada's analogy that the sun represented Krishna and the sunlight, sun molecules represent the Jivatmas. So the Jivatma can never become the sun. But the sun could be one little molecule of himself if he desired. He could simply appear as a molecule. That's pretty amazing that the mighty sun, it could appear just as a molecule. The mighty sun itself appearing just as a molecule. So in one sense, Krishna does that because Krishna appears in the world of humans. So Krishna is far beyond any human deva. What to speak of the lesser demigods, such as Gandharvas, Siddhas, Charanas, Vidyadharas. Krishna is far above any of them. But yet Krishna appears in human society, amongst human beings, and appears to be a human being, maybe a prince, with all perfect bodily features, and extremely powerful, but yet he appears as a human being. He even dies, in one sense, like a human being dies. It's just a show to fool the atheistic class of people, but yet Krishna, he in his Leela, he is shot by the hunter simply in his heel, and he takes that opportunity to leave this world. He doesn't leave any. Maybe I don't know if he left some false material body in there.
I think he did.
That may have been part of the Leela. The Balaram, though, of course, leaves in a more dramatic way, simply emanating from his mouth, Seshanaga, and then hopping on Seshanaga and riding away into the dust. So this is all the Lord's Leela, but just see the power of the Lord. He is so powerful, but yet he can appear amongst the human beings, which, we may think are very great, but yet we're really very insignificant in the universe. Very insignificant. Everything is simply controlled here by the mighty devas. Our world changes so quickly. And just like today's Ramanuja Acharya's disappearance day, he's the great Acharya. He lived for 120 years. He is the modern day Acharya of the Sri Sampradaya, the Sampradaya coming from Vishnu through Lakshmi Devi herself. And so, but yet Ramanuja has passed on. 1,000 years has passed by since then. His disciplic succession is still flourishing, but that quickly time changes in our human society. We're all here one day, and then, the next day, things have changed over just the course of a small lifetime. Yet Krishna can appear within our insignificant human society and establish Dharma, establish the principles of religion whereby human beings can progress in human life. And can progress ultimately back home, back to Godhead. So these are some of the mighty personalities who have appeared in our Kali Yuga, not all at once. Although during Lord Chaitanya, during his appearance, he brought with him all of his associates, just like Krishna did. So in that sense, all of them were appearing at once, and the Leela was very powerful. Even people, the great devotees, like I believe one was, let me see if I can get his name right. Maybe it was Abhiram Thakur. If I'm not mistaken, he may have been Subal, or one of Krishna's dear friends. Could have been one of the other ones, Sudama or somebody. But when the calves were stolen and the boys hidden, he never came out. So he was still there in the cave, meditating, waiting, just waiting. And so it was either Lord Chaitanya or Lord Nityananda sent someone to go and get him. And they brought him out. And he was bigger than everybody because he's still from a previous yuga.
Right.
So he, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya or Nityananda, he shrunk up and assumed the body of Abhiram Thakur. If I'm not mistaken, that's who he was. So he never appeared through a mother and a father in this world, but he was simply there from the previous Leela. And he joined Lord Chaitanya's entourage, and I believe he was the devotee would go around with a whip. And if he whipped you, then you would become infused with love of God. I mean, just think if TV evangelists in our modern era could do that, rather than pounce across the stage, in a sort of ecstasy, rambling off biblical verses and trying to infuse people with some love for Jesus. Just think if they could just crack a whip and somebody would go into ecstasy of love of Godhead. But Abhiram Thakur had that ability. There were others that scared people because if you wasn't genuine, and I believe if you paid obeisances or something like that, something would happen.
If the deity was not,
or the Shalagram.
If the deity or Shila was not properly installed or something, that the deity will crack.
The deity would crack. So they had all sorts of abilities. There was also.
If the devotee wasn't worshipping the Shalagram Shila, the Shalagram Shila would crack.
Oh yeah, if the devotee wasn't properly worshipping his Shalagram.
Okay.
Then there was Nakula Brahmachari, who could he could know so many. He knew Krishna, and people wanted to test whether he was really that greatly Krishna conscious. So there was some test that the audience made, somebody in the audience, that I'm thinking of Nakula Brahmachari, and if he's really can understand things beyond his purview, beyond any ordinary man's purview, then he will come here. And he came. He said, so he knew. There were so many. The Shringa Brahmachari, in his meditation, he made the road for Lord Chaitanya to go to a certain place, and when no longer could he make the road, he understood that that's as far as Lord Chaitanya would go.
Yeah.
But there was so many of these powerful personalities, like we just celebrated Advaita Acharya's appearance day. We just can't understand their potency, yet they all appeared on earth all at once and created this Sankirtan movement. Right in the midst of the powerful Mogul Empire. And, you don't get away with stuff like this ordinarily, but Lord Chaitanya and his associates could, and they could establish this Sankirtan movement in the world. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta and so many other predecessors appeared. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Vaishnavism had dwindled. Time rode on. It was taken cheaply by the devotees, and they created various deviant types of sects, such as the Guranga Nagaris and various other ones. Bhaktivinoda defined them approximately 8 or 9, something like that, who had deviated. It had become, they took this Rasa Leela, or this Madhurya Leela, some of them to be ordinary affairs, and there was some emphasis on human sexuality in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and the British, as well as other Hindu groups, considered that it was a sort of despicable cult. Gaudiya Vaishnavism had become to some degree, and there was certainly a mentality like that was there. Even Vivekananda, and before coming to America, or maybe right after coming to America, he made some foul comment like that, of Vaishnavism, that's just, a sex cult or something like that, he said. So Bhaktivinoda had to confront all that and establish the dignity and integrity of Lord Chaitanya's movement again. That's why he's often considered the 7th Goswami. of course, with the speak of the disciples of Lord Chaitanya. So many powerful devotees, and the Lord himself had incarnated in the Kali Yuga to give the opportunity for people to go back home, back to Godhead, before the age of darkness really sets in. And then the Lord will only come as Kalki and revive bring about the dawn of Satya Yuga, bring about the age of goodness again. This Kali Yuga is said that it really doesn't affect the celestial planets. But the Devas don't want to come here because it's so dark. What could they do there? They have to fight with all the warlords who are just, usurping things from all the people and just causing misery throughout the world to supply their harems and their war chests, their treasuries, and so who wants to be in Kali Yuga? That's why Lord Chaitanya put the emphasis on renouncing the world through Krishna consciousness. Not that we all had to become a sannyasi, but we all should see that it's just temporary, and to get too absorbed just in family and property is simply results in attachment and having to take rebirth. So better to understand things as they are and see its temporary nature, and that it's only meant to help elevate us in Krishna consciousness. So we utilize everything in Krishna's service to become Krishna conscious. Our spouses, our children, our homes, we use everything in the service of Guru and Guranga. And by doing so, we are able to practice Krishna consciousness in a genuine way, and to the extent that we can fix our mind on Krishna. Even in the Gita, Krishna says one can know me at the hour of death, who practices Krishna consciousness. And he further says that if you do remember me at the time of death, then you will attain to a nature like mine. So that's real progress. To get a body that no longer becomes ill, no longer grows old, no longer has some sort of karma whereby we have to suffer, or we get food by enjoyment to think that life is very merry, when ultimately there's something lurking in the background that will change it. So it's better to get take the opportunity to get a spiritual form, and that is what Lord Chaitanya's movement's all about. And we utilize everything, for that purpose. Even the whole Vedic system of Varnashram, we utilize it to help people to become Krishna conscious. And otherwise, there's, in one sense, not even a need of it if people will surrender to the order of the spiritual master. Prabhupada says, then with one great jump, simply following the order of the spiritual master, one can go back home to Godhead and avoid all the rigorous routine of the Varnashram system. But we utilize the Varnashram system because most people can't so strictly follow the order of the spiritual master and make that great jump, to pure devotional service. So what do? That Varnashram is there to help us to get to that place. It's a gradual process. So Krishna doesn't force anybody to all or nothing sort of process. But there's yoga is like a ladder, and we simply walk up that ladder to the heights of bhakti, which are epitomized by Lord Chaitanya and his devotees, who absorb themselves in the ecstasy of bhakti. When Lord Nityananda came to preach in Bengal, leaving Orissa, when Lord Chaitanya sent him back to preach, and he left with some of his stalwart disciples, some of the cowherd boys from Krishna Lila, had joined him. And they would fall into ecstasy while traveling and forget where they were going and forget where they even ended up, and would have to ask people, which way was the Ganga, and they would direct them back, and then they would get lost again because the ecstasy would become so powerful they wasn't paying attention where they were going. They were just going. And but eventually they got to where they were going, and Lord Nityananda, in a very unorthodox way, because in orthodox Varnashram, Brahmins don't make disciples out of Sudras. They make disciples out of Brahmins. And they may have their followers amongst all the people. But Lord Nityananda, he associated with Vaishyas and other people. And he would engage everybody in chanting Harinam, and he didn't even wear the clothing of a mendicant or a renunciate. And he didn't renounce those things that mendicants normally renounce. And he didn't carry a Sridandi or an Ekadandi. He carried an iron rod, and he wore rings, and he put sandalwood paste on his body, and he wore very fine silks, and he had turbans on his head. And this way he simply chanted the glories of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna throughout Bengal, just making people Krishna conscious. So, we're not exactly orthodox in one sense. At the same time, we're certainly authorized. And there may be many very orthodox devotees in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. But they would never, and although Lord Chaitanya in many ways was orthodox, he strictly followed sannyas order, never associated with ladies, but at the same time, he was openly chanting God's names, making all the common people into devotees, not just Brahmins, who would then become the spiritual masters for the rest of society. But, they were spiritual master for all of society, but still they would initiate other Brahmins to follow in their footsteps, for themselves to become the spiritual masters of the children of all the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Sudras. So, Lord Chaitanya was making everyone just Krishna conscious, full of love of Godhead. And Lord Nityananda was definitely unorthodox. He was unorthodox, and if Lord Chaitanya warned people, be very careful not to offend Nityananda Prabhu, because he's none different from myself. That even if Nityananda goes into a place of liquor and associates with a Muslim girl, you should not say anything about Lord Nityananda. And the Lord Chaitanya went on to tell this very pure Brahmin who had some doubts. He told him the story of how the sages, some sage sons of Brahma, criticized and laughed at him when he became afflicted with sexual desire for his daughter. And as a result of that, they all took birth as sons of Hiranyakashipu and were killed by Indra and suffered. And then later they took birth as the sons of Devaki and suffered at the hands of Kamsa. And then Lord Krishna went and saved these sons, and when they drank the milk from Devaki's breast that Krishna himself had drank, then again they could return to their original position. And Lord Krishna warned them, not to ever criticize, a great person, a person such as Brahma, a great controller. Just like Daksha criticized Lord Shiva, and as a result, he ended up with the head of a goat. So, Lord Chaitanya was warning, everybody should be very careful not to find fault in Lord Nityananda. So, our movement, Lord Chaitanya's movement, it's a part of the whole Vedic culture, and it can represent, the heights of that culture, but at the same time, it can be very liberal and unorthodox, preaching Krishna consciousness to the masses of people. And it may take in, and it did take in, like Srila Prabhupada, he did what was completely unorthodox. He initiated Malechas and Yavanas, and even made them Brahmins and sannyasis. That is completely un-Vedic. It's completely un-Vedic. And so, not only that, but he gave ladies Brahminical initiation, and then had them within his temples take care of the murti. So these were very unorthodox things that Prabhupada did. But he was turning Malechas and Yavanas into devotees, creating a Krishna conscious society in parts of the world that it never existed, and who the people from those parts of the world had come to India and had conquered and manipulated the whole Vedic culture for their own purposes. From the Muslims to the British. The French, Portuguese were also there. The Dutch were also there. And each of them were simply, conquering it and then utilizing its revenue for their benefit. And ultimately, even made very direct attempts to convert them all to their religion. So Prabhupada, he certainly changed some details, but he didn't change the conclusion of Vedic knowledge to become a devotee of Krishna and surrender everything to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah.
I have to go, but don't forget to take darshan. We decorated them all.
Okay. So our movement is still dealing with so many issues. Without Prabhupada here, then we come together and we debate issues and make decisions. One of the most prominent ones being whether we'll whether the governing board commission of the society will allow a lady to give Diksha initiation. That's one of the most prominent issues. So, this is something that is also not Vedic. Although in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you may not see it in the Sri Sampradaya, but in the Sri Sampradaya they also don't initiate Malechas and Yavanas. And they have a sort of restricted caste system, not by but more by birth than by quality. Whereas in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the lineage coming from Nityananda Prabhu to Janava Mat, there were 3 other ladies in that line of Diksha line, not necessarily Siksha line, but the Diksha line coming to Bhaktivinoda. There were 3 other ladies who were 2 of them with the titles Goswami, the feminine form of Goswami. I forget what the Sanskrit is. So it had existed within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now, Bhaktivinoda, he accepted ultimately Jagannath Das Babaji is his prominent Siksha guru and not his Diksha guru. I think Vipendra something from who was the person who initiated Bhakti-Vinod. So in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we find that it existed before ISKCON, and with the speak of ISKCON, which is quite different in these ways from the Gaudiya Math. In ISKCON, there's already ladies who are temple presidents, GBCs, preachers, because there are many ladies like this in the world. You don't have a 15th century, a 16th century, 17th century, 18th century Christian, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist culture where ladies stay in the home. But all over the world, you have ladies who are educated and taking up careers and working in the world, many of them right next to men. In fact, even in the United States Congress, there were at least 17 ladies elected Congress people to represent the people in their districts. And I was mentioning earlier that it was Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, who assumed the role in politics and ultimately defeated Pakistan. And what was either the first or the second war with them. So, Prabhupada was expert as an acharya at seeing, how to apply Krishna consciousness according to the circumstances that we have in the world, time, place, and circumstances. And it's a little bit harder for us, especially because, you deal with an open debate on the issue, and you deal with where, things become almost political and with partisan sides, so it becomes very difficult, But still, the devotees are it's a very difficult thing to work out, especially, as an international society. And then you have in India, if the governing board commission grants this authority, then you may create a faction amongst Orthodox Indian devotees where that's just, to them, it's against their culture. And you don't find a lot of lady pujaris in India because it's something that's never done there. Whereas in the West, it's much more common, although in a lot of Christian religions, many times there's a sort of sexism, where if it's a lady minister, the church may be boycotted. Even today, it was much more so maybe 20, 30, 40, especially 50 years ago. Not as much today, but it still exists. Among some congregations, they would not be able to accept a lady minister. And we find that in Catholicism, the largest sect of Christianity, whereas the men still take vows of celibacy, and there's only men who act as priests, bishops, and the ultimate head of the church. So, and they would have, and there's always this agitation to initiate ladies as priests. But still, to this day, they haven't done that. And that all begun mainly due to property rights being fearful that church property would come under the control of families rather than under the control of church. So anyway, everybody, the issues, the goal is to go back home, back to Godhead, and to help people to do that. And so we utilize everything, and certainly including Varnashram, as Prabhupada wanted us to utilize it, because there were so many devotees not able to hang on to just practicing pure Krishna consciousness. He wanted to establish Varnashram for the purpose of helping people to become Krishna conscious. And all of our ISKCON's leaders are making powerful and humble attempts to do so. All right, I'm going to end here rather than continue talking about all of our issues, such as the non-violent milk issue in the world, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama.
Hare Krishna.
I heard somebody say that the Lord Brahma couldn't take the real cowherd boys. They were other, like Maya Sita's, kind of thing, because he wasn't powerful enough to control the real, because the cowherd boys are such powerful transcendental personalities. I heard somebody with real authority saying that there's no way that he could actually kidnap the.
Well, maybe he had read in one of the Goswami's books or something about that. It doesn't say that in the Krishna book, but it could say in one of the Goswami's books,
Yeah.
And so then Krishna may have had the real cowherd boys go off someplace.
I just remember when I was listening to it was somebody that was, well respected. I can't remember, or I read it, but I had never heard that before. But it kind of reminds me, that story that you told me reminds me of that after World War II, and sometimes I think maybe even World War I, but in World War II definitely, they would find Japanese soldiers on these remote islands in the 50s and early 60s, and they still fought. They were still fighting in World War II. They didn't know that they had surrendered. Huh?
They never knew the war came.
They never knew, no. These are true stories. They actually would find them in caves and places like that. They had no idea the war was over. Nobody told them. They were holding the fort.